Hello, students. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about score and parts preparation. First, I want to start with why this matters. For a lot of people, cleaning up your score and parts and proofreading everything is probably not the most fun part of composing ever. Although if you are a very detail-oriented person, you might find it somewhat meditative and appealing in a certain way. Um, but for a lot of people, it kind of feels like busy work, and it can be a bit tedious. Um, but it's really really critical um, for a few different reasons. So first, it's important because having a score and parts that are very clean and clear are going to help you to get better performances of your music. Um, for one thing, when performers see well prepared materials that composers have clearly spent time and effort getting ready, it helps the performers to trust you. So they're going to approach the music in a more open minded and accepting manner, and they're going to want to reciprocate the care and attention that you've put into the music when they're preparing the music for performance. Having these well prepared materials also minimizes questions that performers might ask, which can take up rehearsal time or can cause delays in the preparation process if they have to email you or ask you what something means or what your intention was. So it's going to allow them to better make use of the time they have to get your music ready for performance. In addition to making sure that uh, you are set up for the best possible performance, having a good, clean score and parts creates a good first impression. Um, Obviously, on the performers, but also you might potentially show your music to other people, maybe other performers or conductors that you want to program your piece or that you want to commission you to write a new piece. Or you might want to send your score off for a competition or for a application for a summer festival or for a college program. And having materials that are um, very well done is going to really give you a leg up, because the score is usually the first thing people look at. So having your score and your parts look really, really good, it shows that you know what you're doing, and it shows that you care about your music enough to put in the time to really make it look professional on the page. So again, that's going to give you a leg up when you are showing your music to other people. So clearly, this is very important. Um, but how do you do it? Uh, I'm going to give you some tips here, and then you'll find some other materials linked in Google Classroom. So, the first and most basic tip is that all of your notations need to be completely legible. So, you need to think about size. Presumably, music is going to be sitting on a stand that'll be, a couple feet away from the performer's face. So you can't make things too small to read at a distance. Um, so depending on the type of music you're writing, there's different sizes, usually measured in millimeters, that are standard. Um, and you can find those in some of the reference materials like the Gould book and so forth. In addition to making things big enough to read, you want to make sure to leave enough space around things so that everything is readable. You don't want to have the music too crunched horizontally so that the rhythms aren't clear, or that note heads or accidentals or things like that are running into each other. You want to also make sure there's enough vertical space between the staff and dynamics, and between dynamics and note heads or ends of stems, and between the material for one staff and that of another staff if you have multiple staves in your score. Um, and when you're making sure to leave enough space for all of those things, you absolutely want to make sure that nothing is colliding. So nothing should be running into something else, aside from, you know, notes that go through the staff lines and things like that, that it's okay to go through. So I've got a couple little images here to show you examples of collisions to avoid. So the first one has an accidental, the natural, running into the stem of the previous note. So that's a collision, that's no good. And then the sharp is also really, really close to the previous note and to the accent mark underneath that. So things here are just too crunched horizontally, and they need to be spread out a little further. In this one, the collision is between the hairpin and the dynamics. You can see that the start of the crescendo mark is on top of the mezzo forte, and then the end of the crescendo mark goes across the bar line onto the fortissimo. If you have a crescendo going and then it hits a new dynamic right after the bar line, you actually can just end your crescendo right before the bar line. The next two are examples of um, vertical collisions, not horizontal collisions. So here, you can see that in the lower staff, all of the music is really, really close to the upper staff. And the accent with the staccato on the last eighth note is running into the slur. So there needs to be more vertical space between the staves to allow room for each instrument's part and for the articulations not to be colliding with the slur. This last one also has a vertical issue, this time with the dynamics being too close to the beams from the eighth notes. So the crescendo mark is actually running into the last group of eighth notes and is colliding with their beam. So the dynamics there need to be pulled down a little bit. So you're going to have to watch out for collisions like this. And you're also going to want to be very thorough with your other proofreading. So look for collisions, look for anything that's not readable, and look for any sort of orphan markings that got in there by mistake. So in this one, on top of the half note, you kind of see a little strange little line, which is actually a slur that has no end point and is little tiny baby slur that needs to be deleted. In this one, what looks like an accent mark underneath is actually the end of a hairpin. So the hairpin needs to have its endpoint adjusted so that it either ends before the whole note and there's a new dynamic mark under the whole note, or so that it goes throughout the duration of the whole note. So you want to proofread thoroughly to make sure you get any of those sort of errant marks that don't belong there and can be confusing to a player, in addition to finding any of those collisions, and just to make sure that all the information you want in the score is there and is correct. Going along with wanting all the information in the score, you want to try to answer any questions that a performer might ask, which could, again, delay that rehearsal and preparation process. So include all sort of essential details like dynamics, articulations, tempo markings, and so forth. If you have any sort of unfamiliar or non-standard notations or playing techniques, make sure to explain those thoroughly, typically in the front matter to the score, or possibly with a note in the score when it appears for the first time, or sometimes even both. And lastly, you want to follow professional standards for the type of piece you're writing. So there's a variety of resources out there to let you know what these are. Um, and again, I'm going to link some of these in Google Classroom, and some of them are listed in the handout. Two in particular that are great to check out are the MOLA guidelines um, and Elaine Gould's book, Behind Bars. Um, MOLA is the Major Orchestra Librarians Association. So the people who prepare the music for professional orchestras, and they've created a handy PDF with guidelines on how to get your music ready so that it could possibly be played by a professional orchestra. And then the Behind Bars book is pretty much the standard book at this point for music engraving and score and parts preparation. It's also helpful to look at scores of a similar genre to the piece that you're writing. Check out ones that have been published by larger traditional publishing companies, and use those for models for what your scores should look like. For ensemble pieces, there's a few things in particular that you should keep in mind in terms of professional standards. Make sure to use rehearsal marks in the score and the parts anytime that there's people who are not going to be reading off the score. And then in the parts, make sure to use multi-measure rests anytime you have 2 or more measures of rest in a row. Also, if the instruments have longer rests, you want to use cues to help them know when to come in. If there's not a lot of rests, then you might not need the cues, but generally speaking, you're going to want to use cues to help the performers. Also in the parts, you're going to want to figure out the page turns. While some performers today do use tablets to read their music, you can't count on that. A lot of people are still going to read off of physical parts that are printed out. And so if your part is more than 2 pages or possibly 3 pages, you're going to need to figure out places where the player can turn the page. So generally, you're going to want to leave a rest at the bottom of a page so that you could then turn to the next page. And depending on your tempo, you might need more measures or fewer measures in order to turn it. But you're going to need to at least, give them a few seconds to take their hand off the instrument, reach it to the stand and turn the page, and then get back and be ready to play for their next entrance. And then you want to make sure to proofread thoroughly so that all the important information matches between the score and the parts. Basic things like making sure the notes and the rhythms and the dynamics and the slurs and articulations and everything match, but also making sure that the rehearsal marks show up in the right places in both score and parts, and that tempo markings, fermatas, anything else that might impact whether the ensemble can stay together, that all needs to match between the score and the parts. So most notation software are pretty good about making sure that does match these days. but you still need to go back and make absolutely sure, because if something doesn't match, it's going to really, really derail your rehearsal process. Um, and it's going to cause the performers and the conductor to lose some trust in you. Um, so you want to make sure everything matches so that there's no hiccups when the ensemble tries to rehearse together. So these are some basic things to keep in mind for your score and parts preparation. Again, you can check out the different resources in Google Classroom and the handouts to learn more about specific details for different kinds of situations.